There's a lot of money that can be made in service accommodation when we take a look at the daily potential and we compare that to the traditional long-term rental. Let's say like Sophie here, you've got a place in Clapham and you want £150 per night from it. On Rightmove, we can find a similar one-bed property in Clapham in the same location being advertised for £1,700 per calendar month. So taking the £1,700, we times that by 12 to give us our yearly amount, which is £20,400. We divide that by 365 to get our daily amount, which gives us £55 per day for a long-term rental. But you guessed it, it's not that simple. And that's why it's important we cover what service accommodation is, what are the regulations that come with it, what are the traps that you may fall into, and what is the actual reality of the money that you can make from someone that's owned a short-term service accommodation business for 5 years. Hi, it's Stephen here. I'm a full-time property investor, and as I said, I owned and operated a 40-odd plus service accommodation business that I owned for 5 years before I decided to sell it. And I'll give you some insights into how that went throughout this video. So stick around to the end if you want to learn a bit about what the mistakes were, what the issues are, what the lessons you could learn from running a serviced accommodation business. So let's answer the question, what is serviced accommodation? It's where you provide short-term, fully furnished accommodation and some amenities like Wi-Fi for fee-paying guests. And you also provide a cleaning service and a bed linen service, new towels, that type of stuff. And also that you're available 24/7 while someone's staying at the property for any issues that arise during their stay.
Hello.
Serviced accommodation may also be known as holiday rentals, Airbnb, and just short-term accommodation. It essentially works in exactly the same way it does when you book a hotel room. There's no formal contract in place. The terms and conditions are just based on your length of stay, how many people are going there, and the amount of money that you've agreed to pay for that duration. You check in, you check out, you're done. There are certain regulations that you need to abide by if you're going to run a successful service accommodation property or a business. And one of the main ones that catch people out is around with leasehold properties. So this would be like flats, masonettes generally. And so with leasehold properties, you need to make sure that you're allowed to rent out your property as serviced accommodation or a holiday let or as an Airbnb. And then there may be stipulations within your lease when you bought the property that says you cannot rent out your property for short-term accommodation, which essentially means that property can't be done for this type of strategy, serviced accommodation. You also need to check with your mortgage provider that you can actually do short-term rentals with your property as well. Not all of them allow you to do that. And home insurance is another thing you need to check because short-term rentals are not always covered over traditional buildings and home contents insurance. So you might need to get specialist service accommodation insurance in place. Fire safety, gas safety and electrical safety is similar to what you'd have to do if you're renting out your property anyway. You need to do those inspections and get those checks done periodically based on the laws at the time, which is annually at the moment for the gas and electrical. Fire safety checks is just a checklist that you need to get done and maintain records that you've done it. You'll also need to make sure you've got an energy performance certificate if you want to do serviced accommodation. There's also planning regulations you need to abide by, specifically if you're in London and you want to rent out your property for more than 90 days. You actually have to get a planning approval if you want to go beyond 90 days in any one particular year as to do short-term rentals in Greater London. And if you get found out that you go beyond 90 days, there's a potential 20 grand fine. And there's places like Airbnb that already, if your property's in Greater London, they will already restrict you on the number of days that you can rent out your property on their site. You can get around that by getting your planning certificate and then loading that onto Airbnb, and then you'll be able to do more than 90 days. You'll also need to pay income tax on any money that you earn through short-term accommodation, so you have to notify HMRC of all your rental income, which is the same if it's long-term or not. And if you rent a property for more than 140 days, you may be liable, well, you are liable for business rates, which is more for commercial properties than it is for normal residential properties. With long-term residential properties, you pay a council tax. With short-term accommodation, service accommodation, if you rent for more than 140 days in a calendar year, you will have to abide by the business rates, and the Valuation Office Agency, the VOA, will determine what your business rates are for your particular property. But you can get business rates exemption for small businesses if the valuation office agency value your premises at less than 12 grand per year for business rates. You won't pay any business rates at all. So let's now look at the money that you can make from service accommodation property compared to a traditional buy-to-let. With short-term accommodation, the silent killer is vacancy rates. And at the moment, right now, a lot of people in the serviced accommodation business are going to be impacted by the energy prices that we're having to pay. Prices are starting to come down, so it might be that that will get better over the next 12 to 24 months, but at the moment, they're the highest they've been for a very long time. So let's say you've got a property in the heart of London and you think that you can get an occupancy rate of 6 nights out of 7. No one gets 100% occupancy with short-term accommodation. You've also got changeovers and things like that, and it's unlikely that you're going to get someone that wants to book it up for perfect amount of time in between all the different stays. There's always going to be maybe a slight gap. So let's say that you were getting 6 nights out of 7 nights, which would be amazing. So that would be an 86% occupancy rate. But in London, the average hotel occupancy rate was 83% in 2019. So the chances are that you might perform better than the average hotel in London and beat 83%, maybe a bit far-fetched. So the occupancy rate that you're likely to get is going to be based on the location of your actual property. Is it in a city? Is it near lots of amenities? Is it near good transport links, employment? All those types of things that would make a lot of people want to be based and stay for short-term accommodation in that particular spot. So cities are going to do well. Larger towns are going to do less well, and properties that are a couple of miles out from all amenities are going to do even worse. From my own experience, I owned a holiday rentals business, and this was very seasonal as all the properties were basically located right by the beach, had great views, big properties, but people only wanted to stay there in the high season and the shoulder seasons, and maybe they'd go down there for winter breaks and stuff like that. But there's no way that you'd be getting 83% occupancy rates on seasonal properties because there's no employment there, there's no major shopping. It's essentially you just want to go there for a holiday. So with holiday lets, if you live near an attraction or something like that, it may be that you think, well, I could rent out my own home and I could go and stay somewhere else. Or I could go on holiday yourself. And that's exactly what a lot of people did. And they would have nice homes, walking distance to the beach, great facilities like pools and things like that. And there's this one particular property, it could command $10,000 a week. And they would just rent it out for 4 weeks a year and make $40,000 a year and just go on holiday themselves during that time. They'd rent it out peak season and they would rent it out for 4 weeks every year, year after year. And they would only allow people a minimum stay of 7 days at a time. And that way you'd make sure that you get in your weeks. So if people wanted 5 days, they'd turn them away. It'd only be for people that wanted 7 days and they'd have to pay 10 grand for the privilege. But there's a growth side to it as well, because essentially it's your own furniture there, your own beds, your own bed sheets, your pillows, those types of things. Maybe you'll put different ones out for guests and put your ones away in a locked cupboard. But there's going to be more wear and tear because people are treating it like it's a hotel and stuff gets broken, damaged, kids wet the bed. And that happens. And there's also other bodily fluids.
Don't turn the lights out. You see that? This black light shows up bodily fluids. That's exactly what you're seeing.
I wouldn't want to lay on that bed.
Those 2 holes there, that's cigarette holes.
Uh-oh.
Burns. God. Philip semen right there. It is everywhere. Does that make anybody else feel sick?
So to get to our expenses, we need to understand a bit more about occupancy rates. So if we're saying the best areas would be 83%, like central London, that gives us around that 6 out of 7 days. And then if we said major cities, we might be able to get 4 nights out of 7 nights. And then if it's seasonal places like holiday lets, it may be that we only get 2 out of 7 nights as an average throughout the year. So let's take this example. It's in Manchester, it's a 1-bed flat, it's in a great location, and it's been advertised for £108 per night. And let's say that they get a 60% occupancy rate. So that 60% occupancy rate will give us £23,652 per year. Then when we compare that to all the expenses that we're likely to have, it's likely that you're going to have a mortgage. And we're saying that that mortgage will cost us £9,600. Then we're going to have an Airbnb fee, because this was on Airbnb. Airbnb charge 3% of the booking to you, the host, and they also charge the guest around 14% to them to book via Airbnb. So 3% on that £108 is £3.24. We times that by 208 because that's our 4 out of 7 nights. And that will give us £674 that we pay in fees to Airbnb a year. So we've also got cleaning and linen, and we're saying that that's going to be £50, and there's going to be 70 of those, because what we're saying is every 3 nights there's going to be a stay. So we need to clean on everyone's exit before the next one go in there. So then that would mean that there's 70 of those, one before the first stay, there's 69 in total. So therefore, that's going to equal 3,500 for your cleaning and your linen. Then you need to think about utilities and insurance, and I've put that down at £130 per month, times that by 12 equals 1,560. Again, that might be on the light side. Utilities, who knows, certain amount for insurance in there as well. Then you need to think about Wi-Fi, £20 a month times 12 equals £240. Then we need to think about wear and tear. Stuff's going to get broken, glasses, plates, maybe some damage to the walls or doors, mainly have problems with leaky taps, leaky toilets. So allow 10% for wear and tear and another 10% for maintenance. Each one of those is £2,300 per year. Then we need to pay council tax if we're doing residential, maybe business rates, which means you might not have to pay anything, but we'll put down council tax and we'll say council tax is £1,200 per year. Then if it's a flat, you're going to get a service charge because there's communal areas, there might be lifts, things need to be looked after. And we're saying that the service charge is £1,130 on this particular property. And there's ground rent, because it's leasehold, there's a ground rent fee of £150 per year. So as a total, that adds up to £22,654. So then our profit for the year, taking away our total income from our total expenses, equals £998 for the year for that example 1-bed flat at that occupancy rate of 60%. So some of these costs might be different. You might not have a mortgage, or you might have a different amount of mortgage. I went on to Rightmove, looked at this type of property that you buy in Manchester, saw one that was similar for 175 grand, assumed that you bought it on a buy-to-let mortgage with 25% down. So that meant that the mortgage repayments would be around £800 per calendar month, slightly above that on a 5% rate, but I rounded it down to £800. So cleaning and linen is always something that you've got to do. And the more stays you have, the more that cost goes up. The longer the stays, the less that cost is for the same amount of days that someone would be staying, because obviously you only need to clean it at that end. If you're letting people go in for 1 night at a time, that cost of that cleaning is essentially the same, versus if they're there for 3 nights or 4 nights, or you only let it out for 7-night stays, which it might be that that's what you do. Wear and tear, again, I've put 10% down just because that's a good number that is realistic. If you put anything less than that, you know, who knows, but you should put that there, because some years it might be higher, some years it might be lower, but as an average, 10% might be what you find it is. And again, with maintenance, you're going to be providing a service for someone that's there. They'll want someone available 24/7. If they have an issue, for example, the light bulb over the front door's gone out, when they're coming back at night, there's no light for them to find their way back home, or the toilet's broken down, or the washing machine stopped working, or the dishwasher stopped working, or the tap's leaking, or the bath's flooded. All of these things you need to call someone out, and there's a cost associated with fixing it and calling them out. 10% for that, £2,300 for the year. Not a massive amount of money, depending on the number of guests and the likelihood of things that are going to need to be resolved. Another consideration, if you offer dog-friendly accommodation, you need to make sure that that property is pest-free before guests go in there, and ideally deodorised, because dogs at the end of the day bring little pests with them. They may have fleas on them and different things like that. And sometimes they're wet when they come back from a walk, and they spray that stuff everywhere. And as it's not your property, when you're staying somewhere, do you care about where your dog sits, what it does, when it brushes itself? Not as much as you do if it's your own home. Finding reliable cleaners is probably the biggest headache of running a service accommodation business. People aren't reliable as a general rule. People let you down, and no one's perfect 100% of the time. So you're going to be let down, and then you need to have a few cleaners that are available and people that are available at short notice, and therefore you pay probably more for that facility, and which is why they're second on your list and not your main one. We had this experience with one particular cleaner that we would book in via, they're a proper cleaning company, but their cleaner that they was employed by them would go to the property and then use the property when it wasn't being used by guests, and then just clean it after they've stayed there. And they were doing that for a period of time, and it was the owner that then saw that the energy bills were quite high when it was meant to be empty, and asked the question, and we managed to find out that there's this one particular cleaner, she got sacked, that was from this cleaning company that we've used, and she was doing this, staying there when she had access to the keys, the lockbox to get in and out. So that's a consideration with the people that you're employing. Are they 100% trustworthy? So access to properties, the best way to do that is via a lockbox, and you need to work out how you can do that. The ideal way to run a service accommodation business is to be totally hands-off as much as you can do, and allow people to go in, give them the code, they get the keys from the lockbox, let themselves in. With apartments, it's a bit different because it's like a big apartment complex. You go in, there might be a porter there, or there might be no one there. You've got to somehow get into the building, get up the lift maybe, or via the stairs to the front door and then get in. So it's like, how do you get into the building? Normally it might be like a fob or something. So how do you get the fob to them on an apartment block? Where do you put the lockbox? All these things you've got to work out. So these are considerations with what type of property you want to go for to make your life as easy as possible, so you don't have all these extra aggravations. So either way, the profit in this is, I think, a realistic amount. I'm not here trying to sell you a rent-to-rent course or a service accommodation course or anything like that. I'm just talking about service accommodation from my own experience, and I thought it would be interesting to look at what the costs were and work it out to help you understand if this is a viable property strategy if you wanted to get started in property and have no money. At the end of the day, that one would still generate you £988 a year. That may be worth your time. Depends how much you value your time and how much time and effort it would be to run that particular property. And the mortgage would be replaced if you're doing rent to rent by, that would be the amount of money that maybe you guarantee the landlord. So let's have a look at rent to rent and see how that works. So you need to find a landlord that will let you rent the property and then sublet that property to other people. And you need their approval to be able to do that, because if they find out you're doing it and they didn't give you the approval, they can kick you out. And you pay them a guaranteed amount of rent each month, and you might make that guaranteed because you're going to do it over a longer period of time and therefore maybe get a discount, and you say, I'll take over all the maintenance and repairs on the property and look after that. I won't call you for any of that. So that's worth X amount of money. So let's make the rent this amount to be fair about that. I'll take on that responsibility, and I'm there for 2 or 3 years. You pay the expenses each month for the property. So that would be like the Wi-Fi, the gas, electricity, water, insurance, and all the maintenance and repairs on that property. Therefore, guests can stay there and there's no hassle for them. You just got all of that hassle yourself. And the difference is your profit, and that's what you get to keep. So if you've got a property in the middle of it all, say in central London, and you can get high occupancy rates, this model may be worth the extra aggravation that you'd get with short-term rentals to make that extra amount of profit. For me, when it comes to residential property, my preference is long-term rentals over short-term accommodation. I've been there, kind of done all that, the hassle. My objective now is to make the most amount of money in the quickest time with the least amount of risk and the least amount of aggravation. I personally believe buy-to-lets beat short-term serviced accommodation if you're keeping that mantra in mind. So thanks very much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.